Before we begin, a quick and important disclaimer. The following content is intended strictly for educational, historical, and sociological analysis, as well as general entertainment purposes. It does not constitute legal, psychological, or financial advice. The dynamics of family law, domestic relations, and socioeconomic trends vary significantly by state jurisdiction and individual circumstance. Viewers are strongly encouraged to conduct their own due diligence and consult with licensed professionals, such as family law attorneys or certified counselors, regarding their specific personal or legal situations. Every single year in the United States, hundreds of thousands of households quietly undergo a profound structural shift, yet the collective narrative we tell ourselves about this phenomenon remains trapped in the outdated tropes of the 1980s. Consider this chilling reality. If you look at the demographic landscape of modern America, the dissolution of a marriage is not a statistical anomaly, nor is it a simple personal failure. It is a multi-billion-dollar societal institution that reshapes local economies, reallocates generational wealth, and alters the academic trajectories of millions of American students. We often treat this transition as an isolated, private tragedy whispered about behind closed doors. But the data tells a completely different story. It reveals that the shifting structure of the American family is actually one of the most powerful, predictable drivers of macroeconomic and cultural change in modern history. The question we must confront is not why some relationships end, but why the broader system of American social studies has consistently failed to prepare citizens for the systemic reality of this transition. What if the standard narrative of the nuclear family has blinded us to the actual structural mechanics of how adult life unfolds in the United States? In this multi-part masterclass series, we are going to dismantle the myths, look directly at the historical trends, and map out the exact socio-economic landscape of the shared divorce journey in America. For decades, the U.S. audience has been left to navigate the complex intersection of legal frameworks, emotional upheavals, and financial restructurings with nothing more than hearsay and pop culture stereotypes. This video solves that precise problem by providing a rigorous, data-driven framework to understand how family structures evolve within the broader context of American civic life. We will examine how shifting legal doctrines like no-fault legislation transform the legal landscape, how custody arrangements impact local school districts, and how household splits fundamentally alter the velocity of money in the domestic economy. By the end of this comprehensive analysis, you will possess a sophisticated, objective understanding of this major societal pillar, allowing you to view modern American history and social studies through a completely clear, unfiltered lens. To truly understand how we arrived at the current state of American domestic relations, we must first examine the historical baseline of the mid-20th century. During the 1950s and early 1960s, the dominant paradigm in American social studies was the idealized nuclear family, a single wage earner household with a rigid division of labor. Under the legal frameworks of that era, dissolving a marriage required proving specific fault, such as adultery, cruelty, or desertion. This adversarial legal structure meant that the state acted as a strict gatekeeper to family composition, creating immense friction and keeping statistical rates artificially low. The prevailing cultural narrative assumed that this structural arrangement was permanent, but beneath the surface, profound economic and social shifts were already beginning to destabilize this framework. The major turning point arrived in 1969, when California passed the Family Law Act, signed into law by Governor Ronald Reagan, which officially introduced the concept of no-fault divorce to the United States. This legal mechanism allowed couples to dissolve a marriage based on irreconcilable differences, without requiring either party to prove wrongdoing in a court of law. Over the next 2 decades, this legal doctrine swept across the country, fundamentally changing the baseline of American family sociology. Case studies from this era show an immediate, sharp upward trajectory in the statistical frequency of marital dissolutions throughout the 1970s and 1980s. This shift was not merely a change in legal paperwork. It was a profound structural revolution that forced American social studies to rethink the entire concept of the domestic unit. Suddenly, sociologists, economists, and educators had to grapple with the reality of the binuclear family, where children split time between 2 separate households. This introduced massive logistical, emotional, and financial complexities into the daily fabric of American life. For instance, school districts across the country had to adapt their administrative systems to accommodate dual-parent communication, split bus routes, and differing household schedules, demonstrating how a shift in private family law directly ripples out into public infrastructure. Furthermore, the economic implications of this transition cannot be understated. When a single household splits into two distinct units, the immediate consequence is a doubling of fixed living expenses. Two rents or mortgages must be paid, two sets of utilities must be maintained, and duplicate sets of household goods must be acquired. This sudden inflation of baseline living costs creates a unique macroeconomic pressure on the individuals involved. Historical trends indicate that this transition often impacts the economic status of women and men differently, with long-term implications for wage growth, labor market participation, and wealth accumulation. By analyzing these specific economic variables, we can begin to see how the shared journey of family restructuring is inextricably linked to the broader trends of the American economy, influencing everything from real estate demand to consumer spending habits. As we dive deeper into this masterclass, we will also explore how the cultural perception of this journey has evolved over time. In the past, social stigma often isolated families undergoing this transition, leading to a lack of shared resources and communal support. However, as the statistical reality became more pronounced, a collective shift occurred. American society began to develop new frameworks, language, and support systems to contextualize this experience, moving away from a narrative of failure and toward a narrative of structural transition. We see this reflected in modern textbooks, counseling methodologies, and workplace policies that acknowledge the complex realities of contemporary family life. This comprehensive exploration will illuminate those very mechanisms, offering a clear academic roadmap of how the American family continues to adapt, survive, and redefine itself in the 21st century. To fully grasp how this macrostructural shift plays out on the ground in 2026, we have to look past the abstract percentages and examine the actual blueprint of a modern American household navigating this restructuring. Imagine a couple living in a major suburban hub outside of Atlanta, Georgia. Let us call them John and Sarah. They represent a classic case study in contemporary American social studies. For over a decade, they operated a single blended economic unit, sharing a mortgage, pooling health insurance benefits, and filing joint tax returns. From a sociological standpoint, their household functioned as a microeconomy. But when the decision is made to dissolve that legal bond, the immediate operational reality is not just an emotional transition. It is a massive logistical uncoupling that fundamentally changes how capital, labor, and resources move through their community. Think about the sheer scale of the administrative overhead involved in this single transition. The first structural hurdle John and Sarah face is the division of primary marital assets, which in most American middle-class households is anchored entirely by the primary residence. In the economic landscape of 2026, real estate values and interest rates introduce severe complications to this process. Historical trends show that previously, one spouse might simply buy out the other equity share and refinance the mortgage under a single name. Today, however, refinancing a mortgage means abandoning a historically low fixed interest rate locked in years ago and taking on a significantly higher modern rate. Case studies reveal the potential outcomes of this financial friction. Often, neither John nor Sarah can afford to maintain the home independently under current market conditions. This forces an immediate sale of the property, injecting a sudden transaction into the local real estate market, and forcing both individuals to simultaneously enter the highly competitive rental market as separate entities. Suddenly, a single household that required one roof, one heating system, and one internet connection now demands two independent residential spaces. This duplication of demand directly impacts local housing inventory and drives consumer spending across multiple sectors, from moving services to home furnishings. Beyond the immediate physical infrastructure of the home, the structural restructuring moves directly into the realm of human capital and labor force participation. In our case study, Sarah may have taken a step back from full-time career advancement over the last 5 years to manage primary childcare and domestic logistics, while John focused on maximizing corporate wage growth. This common division of labor creates an immediate structural imbalance upon dissolution. When the single unit splits, Sarah faces the immediate necessity of re-entering the labor market at full capacity to achieve self-sufficiency, navigating the modern 2026 job landscape with a resume gap. This shift triggers a secondary wave of economic adjustments. To re-enter the workforce, Sarah now requires professional childcare services, creating a new, fixed monthly expenditure that did not exist when the family operated as a unified domestic unit. Simultaneously, John must adjust his work hours or travel schedule to accommodate a strict, legally mandated joint custody rotation, potentially altering his short-term earning capacity or overtime availability. This illustrates how the micro-level decisions of a single family directly alter labor supply, productivity metrics, and the demand for commercial care services within the local economy. Now, let us zoom out from John and Sarah to look at how this shared journey impacts public institutions, specifically the American public school system. In social studies, the school district is often the primary civic anchor for families. When a family restructures, the school administration becomes the front line for managing the logistical fallout. Consider the administrative workflow required for a school in 2026 to manage a single joint custody arrangement. The institution must maintain duplicate records for student pickup authorizations, separate portals for academic progress tracking, and independent billing accounts for school lunches and extracurricular fees. If John moves across district lines to find affordable housing while Sarah remains in the original neighborhood, the student custody schedule now intersects with complex district residency rules and transportation logistics. School buses must be coordinated across different geographic zones depending on the day of the week. Furthermore, school counselors and educators are thrust into the role of stabilizing the student academic performance through the transition. Data from educational case studies indicates that the initial period of family restructuring can lead to temporary fluctuations in student attendance, assignment completion, and classroom focus. This reality forces public schools to reallocate resource hours towards social work interventions and guidance counseling, demonstrating how private family transitions directly convert into public institutional costs. We must also look at the massive, hidden infrastructure of family law courts and mediation services that underpins this entire social phenomenon. The American legal system is designed to process these transitions through a highly standardized framework, yet the sheer volume of cases creates a perpetual backlog in municipal court systems across the United States. John and Sarah do not simply walk into a courtroom and sign a paper. They must engage with a sophisticated apparatus of state-certified mediators, collaborative family law attorneys, and forensic accountants who specialize in valuation. This ecosystem operates on a strict billable hour model, meaning that a significant portion of a family accumulated generational wealth is liquidated simply to fund the bureaucratic process of division. In American social studies, this represents a major diversion of capital away from traditional consumer investments, such as college savings funds or retirement accounts, and into the professional services sector. The long-term macroeconomic trend of this capital diversion is profound, as it alters the wealth trajectory of multiple generations, changing how much support aging parents can expect from their adult children and how much debt the next generation must take on to pursue higher education. As we analyze these interconnected layers of real estate friction, labor market adjustments, educational institutional strain, and legal asset depletion, a critical question begins to emerge. Why does the conventional framework of American civic education continue to treat the nuclear family as a static, permanent fixture when the data clearly shows it is a dynamic, fluid structure that frequently reconfigures itself? The systemic reality of the shared divorce journey is that it is not a departure from the American experience. It is a core, institutionalized pathway within the American experience. Every legal document filed, every duplicate household established, and every school record updated contributes to a massive, parallel economy that shapes the fabric of our society, just as much as traditional marriages and births do. But understanding the logistics of the split is only the first step in decoding this societal pillar. To truly comprehend the scope of this journey, we have to look deeper into the invisible legal mechanics that govern how these decisions are made before a single document is ever signed in a court of law. What are the hidden historical forces and deep-seated legal doctrines that quietly dictate the fate of assets, earnings, and parental rights long before a couple even realizes their path is diverging? In the next part of this masterclass, we will peel back the layers of the American legal apparatus to reveal the silent statutory engines that drive the entire outcome of the contemporary family restructuring process. To understand these silent statutory engines, we must look directly at how the American legal system categorizes, evaluates, and ultimately redistributes everything a couple owns. When a family unit enters the state legal apparatus in 2026, the process is governed by one of two distinct legal doctrines, depending entirely on geography. The first framework is known as equitable distribution, which is practiced in the vast majority of American states, including jurisdictions like New York, Ohio, and Florida. The second framework is the community property system, which governs states like California, Texas, and Washington. These two philosophies represent fundamentally different approaches to the concept of marital partnership, and their implementation yields vastly different potential outcomes for the individuals involved. Imagine a case study involving a professional couple in Ohio, a state operating under equitable distribution rules. Let us call them Michael and Jennifer. Under this statutory engine, the law does not simply split everything down the middle at a strict 50-50 ratio. Instead, the court is mandated to evaluate what is fair or equitable, based on an extensive list of statutory factors. Step 1 of this legal process involves the precise classification of assets. The court must painstakingly separate marital property from separate property. Marital property generally encompasses any asset acquired or income earned by either spouse during the course of the marriage. Separate property includes assets owned prior to the marriage or received as an individual inheritance or gift. The operational complexity of this step is where many families encounter unexpected structural friction. Consider Michael, who owned a small logistics business before marrying Jennifer. Throughout their 12-year marriage, the business grew significantly in value due to Michael's full-time labor. Under equitable distribution case studies, that appreciation in value is often classified as a marital asset, even though the business was started before the wedding day. The court views Jennifer's domestic contributions, such as managing the household or supporting Michael's career, as an indirect contribution to the growth of that business. A forensic accountant must be brought in to audit the company financial history, determine the exact baseline value from over a decade ago, calculate the modern valuation in 2026, and isolate the active appreciation. This step-by-step financial uncoupling illustrates how deeply entwined individual economic output becomes within the machinery of American family law. Once the classification is complete, Step 2 requires the court to weigh various factors to determine the distribution percentage. These factors include the duration of the marriage, the economic circumstances of each spouse at the time of the division, the desirability of awarding the family home to the parent with primary physical custody of the children, and the tax consequences of the distribution. If Jennifer sacrificed her earning potential to raise their children, the statutory engine may dictate a potential outcome where she receives 60% of the marital assets while Michael receives 40%, balancing her lower baseline earning capacity. Now, contrast this with a community property jurisdiction like Texas or California. Imagine if Michael and Jennifer had lived in Austin, Texas instead. In a pure community property state, the statutory engine operates with rigid mathematical symmetry. The law presumes that all property acquired during the marriage is community property, belonging equally to both spouses. Upon dissolution, the baseline rule is a strict 50-50 division of all community assets, regardless of who earned the money or whose name is on the title. While this system offers predictability, it lacks the flexibility to adjust for long-term earning disparities, meaning both individuals must rely heavily on post-divorce spousal support mechanisms to rectify structural financial imbalances. This brings us to the second major statutory engine operating within American social studies, the modern framework of spousal support, historically referred to as alimony. In 2026, the concept of lifelong spousal support has largely vanished from the American legal landscape, replaced by highly structured, temporary frameworks designed to facilitate economic rehabilitation. The prevailing statutory philosophy views support not as a permanent entitlement, but as a bridge to self-sufficiency. Consider the mechanics of rehabilitative spousal support. If a court determines that one spouse requires assistance, it will establish a strict, time-bound schedule. For example, the court might order support payments for a precise duration of 4 years, explicitly tied to the time required for the recipient spouse to complete a specific educational degree or professional certification program. This step-by-step approach is designed to systematically upgrade the human capital of the lower-earning spouse, allowing them to re-enter the competitive labor market effectively. The calculation of this support relies on a meticulous review of both parties' earning capacities, rather than just their current income. If a spouse is intentionally unrepresented in the workforce or underemployed to artificially lower their income before a court date, the legal system utilizes a process called imputing income. Forensic vocational experts are deployed to analyze the individual's education, past work history, and the current 2026 job market data in their specific geographic region. The expert then testifies that the individual has the capacity to earn a specific salary, and the judge calculates the support obligations based on that theoretical earning capacity, preventing individuals from manipulating the statutory system. Beyond property and spousal support, the most critical statutory engine, governs the division of parental responsibilities and child support. In modern American social studies, the legal terminology has shifted away from winning custody toward a cooperative model of parenting plans and allocation of parental responsibilities. The standard legal metric utilized across all 50 states is the best interests of the child standard. This is not a vague emotional guideline. It is a highly codified legal test that judges must apply systematically. The court examines specific verifiable criteria: the historical caregiving roles of each parent, the emotional stability of each individual, the child adjustment to their current home, school, and community, and the willingness of each parent to facilitate a close, continuing relationship between the child and the other parent. If one parent attempts to alienate the child from the other, the statutory engine often penalizes that behavior by awarding primary residential placement to the cooperative parent, demonstrating how the law actively attempts to regulate interpersonal dynamics for societal stability. Once residential time is allocated, the child support statutory engine takes over, operating on highly rigid, state-mandated mathematical formulas. Most jurisdictions utilize either the income shares model or the percentage of income model. Under the income shares model, the state looks at the combined net monthly income of both parents, determines the total amount statistically required to raise a child in that income bracket based on economic data, and then apportions that financial obligation between the parents in direct proportion to their individual incomes and the number of nights the child spends under each roof. This means that every single night a child spends at a specific house directly alters the monthly flow of capital between adult bank accounts. If a parent crosses a specific statutory threshold, such as moving from 110 nights a year to 120 nights, the child support calculation automatically recalibrates, reducing their monthly payout. This mathematical link between parenting time and financial transactions creates a high-stakes environment where custody schedules are intensely debated, not just for emotional reasons, but for their direct impact on the monthly cash flow of two independent households. As we dissect these intricate legal frameworks of asset division, spousal rehabilitation, and child support formulas, we begin to see that the entire apparatus is designed to function like a cold, calculating machine, converting complex human relationships into quantifiable legal and financial line items. But this clinical process does not happen in a vacuum. It relies heavily on an external, highly organized industry that thrives on the friction of this transition. To truly understand how this impacts the broader fabric of American society, we must look beyond the statutes and examine the actual operational tactics of the professionals who navigate this system. Who are the hidden power players driving these legal engines, and how do their strategic maneuvers behind closed doors shape the ultimate destiny of American family wealth and emotional well-being? In the next part of this masterclass, we will step inside the high-stakes world of family law negotiation, mediation rooms, and adversarial litigation to reveal how the battle for resources is actually fought and won in modern America. To understand how the battle for resources is actually fought and won in modern America, we must pull back the curtain on the multi-billion-dollar professional apparatus that drives the contemporary family law industry. In the landscape of 2026, the resolution of a domestic restructure rarely takes place in a dramatic, televised courtroom battle. Instead, the actual parameters of the future are hammered out in sterile corporate conference rooms, secure digital mediation portals, and via exhaustive multi-round email negotiations conducted by specialized legal intermediaries. This professional network operates as an independent socio-economic ecosystem within American social studies, populated by family law attorneys, certified financial divorce analysts, vocational evaluators, and private mediators. Each of these actors employs specific, highly calculated tactical maneuvers designed to optimize potential outcomes for their respective clients while systematically processing the dissolution of the marital partnership. Imagine an intricate case study involving two professionals living in Denver, Colorado, whom we will call Robert and Emily. Robert is a senior software systems architect, and Emily is a director of healthcare administration. Over 15 years of marriage, they accumulated a sophisticated portfolio consisting of a high-value primary residence, multiple tax-advantaged retirement accounts, a shared stock portfolio, and unvested corporate equity options. When they enter the legal system, the machinery of negotiation begins not with an open debate, but with a highly structured, step-by-step process known as mandatory financial disclosure. In family law, this is the administrative foundation upon which all subsequent strategies are built. Both Robert and Emily are legally required to produce a comprehensive, sworn financial affidavit, documenting every single bank account, line of credit, asset valuation, and monthly expenditure down to the dollar. The tactical maneuvering begins immediately during this disclosure phase. A frequent strategy involves the meticulous examination of the opposing party's historical spending patterns. Emily legal counsel will scrutinize Robert's corporate credit card statements, bank ledgers, and cash withdrawals, looking for what is legally termed waste or dissipation of marital assets. If the data reveals that Robert utilized marital funds for non-marital purposes, such as funding speculative independent business ventures or purchasing luxury items for individuals outside the family unit, the court can claw back those funds. The step-by-step calculation involves quantifying the exact amount of dissipated capital and subtracting it directly from Robert's final distribution share, effectively penalizing the behavior retroactively. Once the baseline data is established, the venue shifts to the mediation phase, which in many American jurisdictions in 2026 is a mandatory prerequisite before a judge will even grant a trial date. Imagine if Robert and Emily find themselves in a mandatory court-ordered mediation session. The structure of this process is designed to minimize public institutional strain while forcing a compromise. The parties do not sit across a table staring at one another. Instead, they engage in a process called shuttle diplomacy. Robert and his attorney sit in one conference room, while Emily and her counsel occupy another. The neutral third-party mediator literally shuttles back and forth between the rooms, carrying proposals, counteroffers, and legal reality checks. The operational strategy of a skilled mediator relies on the systematic erosion of extreme positions through cost-benefit analysis. For instance, if Robert insists on retaining 100% of his unvested corporate stock options, the mediator will pivot to Emily's room and calculate the immense financial cost of litigating that specific issue at trial. The mediator will demonstrate that the expert witness fees for a forensic accountant to value those unvested options in open court could easily exceed the actual net present value of the equity itself. By presenting these stark economic realities, the mediator forces both parties to view their emotional positions through the cold lens of financial utility. Case studies indicate that this high-pressure, cloistered environment yields a full or partial settlement in the vast majority of domestic cases, serving as a vital relief valve for the overburdened American judiciary. However, when mediation fails, the transition into formal adversarial litigation triggers a completely different set of operational protocols. In the courtroom ecosystem, the primary weapon is the strategic deployment of specialized expert witnesses. Consider the role of a vocational evaluator in a high-stakes dispute. If Emily contends that she cannot work full-time due to the historical division of domestic labor, Robert's legal team can hire a certified vocational expert to challenge this assertion. The evaluator will conduct a step-by-step analysis, testing Emily's cognitive and professional skills, reviewing her employment history, and analyzing real-time labor market data for the Denver metropolitan area in 2026. The expert then delivers a formal report to the court, stating that Emily has the immediate capacity to earn a specific competitive salary in the healthcare sector. This testimony effectively shifts the legal burden, allowing the judge to impute that income to Emily, which directly reduces Robert's long-term spousal support exposure. Simultaneously, the battle over parental rights undergoes an equally clinical processing through the utilization of a court-appointed child custody evaluator, or a guardian ad litem. This professional acts as an independent investigator for the state. They conduct unannounced home visits, interview school teachers, review pediatric medical records, and observe interpersonal interactions between the parents and the children. The tactical maneuver for both Robert and Emily during this phase is to demonstrate absolute structural stability. Any evidence of hostility, erratic scheduling, or non-compliance with temporary parenting agreements is meticulously documented and compiled into a comprehensive final recommendation to the judge. Because family court judges carry massive caseloads, historical trends demonstrate that they rely heavily on these independent professional recommendations, often adopting them verbatim into the final legal decree. This high-intensity professional framework reveals that the shared journey of family reconfiguration is governed by a sophisticated elite of legal and financial technicians who translate human friction into structured billing hours and legal precedents. The real-world consequence of this system is that the ultimate distribution of assets and parental rights is heavily determined by a party's capacity to fund this professional representation over an extended period. This structural reality introduces a profound socioeconomic stratification within American social studies, where affluent households can utilize advanced forensic mechanisms to protect capital, while working-class families are often forced into rapid, suboptimal compromises due to the sheer cost of legal access. As we look at the immense complexity of these negotiation rooms, forensic calculations, and expert witness strategies, we begin to realize that the formal conclusion of the legal case is not the end of the journey, but merely the authorization of a new, highly complex operational phase. Once the final signatures are applied to the decree, the professional apparatus recedes, leaving the restructured family to face the raw, day-to-day logistical reality of their new life. How do these legal dictates actually function when applied to the messy, unpredictable flow of real-world human existence? How do the abstract calculations of child support formulas and custody calendars translate into the emotional and psychological fabric of the individuals who must live within them? In the next part of this masterclass, we will step out of the legal offices and enter the deep, lived reality of the post-restructure landscape, examining the hidden psychological transformations and daily survival strategies that redefine the modern American family identity. When the legal dust settles and the forensic specialists depart, the restructured family is immediately thrust into the post-restructure landscape of 2026, where abstract legal decrees must be converted into lived human reality. This phase represents a profound psychological and operational transformation within American social studies. The primary challenge shifts from the macrodynamics of asset division to the microdynamics of daily survival, emotional recalibration, and identity reconstruction. To analyze this systematic evolution, we must examine the hidden psychological undercurrents that affect both adults and children as they navigate the day-to-day implementation of a court-mandated parenting plan. Imagine an intimate case study of a restructured family living in Columbus, Ohio. Let us look at David and Lisa, and their two school-age children, Marcus and Chloe. The court has just finalized an alternating weekly joint physical custody schedule, a highly common arrangement in modern American family sociology. On paper, the arrangement looks perfectly balanced, splitting time precisely down the middle. In practice, however, this schedule demands a massive, continuous cognitive load from every single member of the household. Every Sunday afternoon at the designated exchange point, a quiet but intense psychological transition occurs. Children Marcus and Chloe. This transition requires a rapid recalibration of behavioral expectations, household rules, and environmental cues. In David's home, the domestic culture might emphasize rigid academic schedules, specific dietary routines, and highly structured leisure time. In Lisa's home, just 20 minutes away, the operational culture may favor independent problem-solving, flexible meal times, and a more fluid approach to daily logistics. Psychological case studies indicate that children navigating these dual environments must develop high levels of adaptive intelligence. They must become adept social observers, learning to seamlessly switch between two distinct sets of familial expectations without losing their core sense of stability. This constant environmental shifting can induce a unique form of cognitive fatigue, particularly during the initial months of the transition. If Marcus forgets a specific science textbook or Chloe leaves her soccer uniform at the other parent's house, the logistical error triggers an immediate emotional and operational crisis. It forces communication between two adults who may still be processing deep-seated personal resentment. In American social studies, this ongoing interaction is analyzed through the lens of co-parenting efficiency. Sociologists categorize co-parenting into three distinct structural models: parallel parenting, cooperative co-parenting, and conflicted co-parenting. In parallel parenting, which is frequently utilized in high-conflict case studies, David and Lisa operate in complete isolation from one another. They maintain strict boundaries, communicating solely through court-approved mobile applications that log and archive every message for potential judicial review. There are no shared birthday parties, no joint parent-teacher conferences, and no casual phone calls. Each parent operates as a sovereign entity within their own week, minimizing direct contact to prevent friction. While this model successfully insulates the children from overt parental hostility, it places the burden of continuity entirely on the shoulders of the children, who must carry information and logistical requirements back and forth between two non-communicating fortresses. Contrast this with the cooperative co-parenting model, which represents the ideal outcome in contemporary family psychology. Under this framework, David and Lisa actively choose to subordinate their past marital grievances to the collective well-being of Marcus and Chloe. They maintain a shared digital calendar, coordinate consistency and behavioral discipline across both households, and present a unified front at major educational milestones. Case studies demonstrate that this high level of cooperation significantly mitigates the long-term stress experienced by children, allowing them to view the family restructure not as the destruction of their support network, but as its expansion into two distinct physical anchors. However, achieving this level of cooperative harmony requires a major psychological transformation for the adults involved, often characterized by a profound identity crisis. For over a decade, David's identity was structurally anchored in the role of a co-residential father, a husband, and a primary breadwinner within a unified household. Suddenly, under the 2026 custody rotation, he faces a stark reality. 50% of the year, his home is completely silent. The bedrooms are empty, the toys are packed away, and his primary daily purpose as a hands-on caregiver is temporarily paused. This sudden fluctuation between intense parental engagement and total isolation can lead to a psychological phenomenon known as boundary ambiguity, where an individual struggles to define their role and place within a shifting family structure. During his off week, David must actively reconstruct his personal identity separate from his children and his former spouse. He must re-engage with individual hobbies, build new adult social networks, and learn to manage the psychological weight of the empty house. Historical trends suggest that the inability to successfully navigate this identity reconstruction can lead to prolonged emotional distress, directly impacting an individual's workplace productivity, physical wellness, and capacity to provide stable care when the children return. Simultaneously, Lisa faces an equally intense set of psychological adjustments during her weeks as a solo parent. When the children are under her roof, she must carry the entire logistical and emotional burden of the household independently. There is no second adult to share the load when a child falls ill in the middle of the workday, no partner to assist with dinner preparation during late-night corporate deadlines, and no immediate sounding board to validate parenting decisions. This concentration of responsibility often induces high levels of parental burnout, forcing solo parents to rely heavily on extended family networks, community support groups, and neighborhood childcare cooperatives. This reliance on external systems highlights a broader sociological reality. The shared journey of family restructuring fundamentally redraws the boundaries of the community itself. As single-parent households seek stability, they form new, highly resilient networks of mutual aid. We see this manifested in modern suburban neighborhoods where single parents intentionally cluster, sharing transportation duties, pooling grocery expenses, and creating collective spaces where children of restructured families can interact with peers navigating similar domestic realities. These organic support structures represent a vital, grassroots adaptation within American civic life, showing how society naturally evolves to stabilize its members when formal institutions fall short. As we analyze these intricate psychological adaptations, dual household logistics, and community networks, we begin to see that the true legacy of the shared journey is not found in the legal paperwork, but in the long-term resilience of the individuals who live through it. The modern American family is not disintegrating. It is dynamically reconfiguring itself to survive in a highly complex socio-economic environment. But the daily logistics of co-parenting and identity reconstruction are only half the story. To fully comprehend the systemic impact of this phenomenon, we must look at how these micro-level family dynamics intersect with the massive institutional forces of the American macroeconomy. How do these millions of independent, restructured households collectively alter the landscape of consumer markets, wealth transfer, and government policy in the United States? What happens to the trajectory of American capital when the traditional nuclear model is no longer the primary driver of economic consumption? In the next part of this masterclass, we will shift our analytical lens from psychology to macroeconomics, exploring the massive financial ripples that the modern family evolution sends through the core of the American marketplace. To trace these massive financial ripples through the core of the American marketplace, we must examine how the proliferation of restructured households fundamentally alters the aggregate demand for goods, services, and credit in the United States. In the economic landscape of 2026, macroeconomists increasingly recognize that the fragmentation of a single domestic unit into two independent purchasing entities acts as a highly potent, structural multiplier across several critical sectors of the domestic market. When a marriage dissolves, the immediate consequence is not a reduction in overall consumer spending, but a rapid mandatory reallocation of capital that artificially inflates demand for baseline consumer commodities, while permanently lowering a family capacity for long-term luxury or discretionary consumption. Imagine an industrial-scale scenario where 100,000 middle-class American families undergo a structural reconfiguration simultaneously within a fiscal year. Under the traditional unified household model, These families represented 100,000 individual points of demand for primary consumer infrastructure. They required 100,000 residential structures, 100,000 major appliance packages, 100,000 high-speed broadband subscriptions, and 100,000 baseline utility linkages. The moment these units undergo a structural split, that baseline consumer demand instantly doubles to 200,000 independent points of consumption. This is the structural consumption multiplier at work in American social studies, and its systemic impact on the broader economy is immense. Let us explore a concrete case study within the consumer credit and banking sector to understand the step-by-step mechanics of this capital reallocation. Consider an urban professional household in Phoenix, Arizona, consisting of two individuals whom we will call Brian and Sophia. Prior to their decision to split, Brian and Sophia maintained a pristine, unified credit profile. They qualified for top-tier prime lending rates, held a single, high-limit credit card account that aggregated their daily consumer loyalty rewards, and maintained a robust liquid savings account dedicated to long-term capital accumulation. When the legal restructuring process begins, this unified financial engine is systematically dismantled. The joint bank accounts are legally frozen or apportioned by the courts, and both Brian and Sophia are forced to independently re-establish creditworthiness in a highly restrictive 2026 lending environment. Step 1 of this financial uncoupling involves the sudden issuance of two independent credit profiles. Because their separate individual incomes are lower than their combined marital income, both Brian and Sophia suddenly represent a higher default risk to commercial banking institutions. Historical trends indicate that as a direct consequence, they are frequently subjected to higher interest rates on individual auto loans, personal lines of credit, and credit card balances. Furthermore, because their liquid cash reserves are heavily depleted by the immediate costs of establishing two distinct physical households, both individuals are forced to rely heavily on revolving consumer credit to fund baseline survival needs during the transitional year. They must finance new furniture purchases, secure individual security deposits, and acquire duplicate sets of kitchen appliances, electronics, and children clothing. This sudden, forced reliance on high-interest revolving credit drives massive profitability within the commercial banking sector, showing how family restructuring directly feeds the corporate bottom line, while siphoning away an individual's future purchasing power. We must also look at the profound structural shifts occurring within the American automotive and transportation markets as a direct result of these domestic transitions. In a unified suburban household, a family often coordinates their daily logistics using a complementary asset strategy. They might own one large sport utility vehicle designed for collective family travel and school transit, and one smaller, highly fuel-efficient sedan for individual corporate commuting. The moment the family splits into an alternating weekly custody framework, this complementary transit model collapses entirely. Brian and Sophia now require absolute logistical independence to ensure they can transport their children to school, extracurricular activities, and medical appointments during their respective custody weeks. Sophia can no longer rely on Brian to manage the afternoon carpool when she has a late corporate meeting, and Brian can no longer utilize the primary family vehicle for weekend errands if Sophia has physical possession of the asset. Case studies in consumer economics show that this operational bottleneck forces the rapid acquisition of an additional vehicle, altering inventory velocity for pre-owned and new automobile dealerships across the United States. This extra vehicle requires independent registration, separate commercial insurance premiums, and duplicated maintenance schedules, further draining the liquid capital reserves of the restructured family and transferring that wealth directly into the automotive service ecosystem. Beyond the automotive sector, the corporate child care and domestic outsourcing industries experience an immense structural boom driven by the rise of solo-parent households. When Brian and Sophia operated a unified unit, they could efficiently trade off domestic labor, minimizing the need for commercial services. If one parent had to travel for business, the other was present to manage the household. In the post-restructure reality, during their respective solo-parenting weeks, both individuals face an absolute deficit of time. To maintain their corporate employment and protect their primary income streams, they are forced to monetize tasks that were previously completed through unpaid domestic cooperation. They must systematically contract out for commercial after-school care, invest in professional meal delivery services to bypass food preparation time, and hire private house cleaning services to maintain their properties amidst an unmanageable schedule. This forced outsourcing accelerates the velocity of money within local service economies, converting what was once private, non-monetized family labor into taxable corporate revenue. It creates a paradigm where the modern service sector becomes an essential structural crutch for the survival of the contemporary American family, permanently altered by the demands of the dual household framework. As we synthesize these macroeconomic realities, a striking paradox emerges. While the individual wealth and long-term financial security of a restructured family are often severely compromised by the uncoupling process, the immediate effect on the gross domestic product of the United States can appear artificially expansionary. The duplication of housing, the forced acquisition of vehicles, the expansion of consumer credit usage, and the monetization of domestic labor all stimulate immediate economic activity across multiple commercial sectors. However, this immediate economic activity comes at a profound long-term cost to the stability of the American middle class. The capital that is liquidated to fund the duplication of a household is capital that is permanently diverted away from generational wealth transfers, private small business capitalization, and long-term retirement investments. This structural diversion alters the macroeconomic trajectory of the entire nation, creating an escalating reliance on social safety nets and state infrastructure as aging individuals approach retirement with severely depleted asset bases. But the economic ripples do not stop at the boundaries of corporate consumer markets. This massive reallocation of private capital eventually intersects directly with the legislative and regulatory mechanisms of the state, forcing public policymakers to fundamentally rewrite the rules of civic engagement, taxation, and public benefit distribution. How do the legislative engines of the United States adapt to an economy where the traditional tax-paying family unit is no longer the statistical baseline? In the next part of this masterclass, we will shift our focus to the high-stakes world of public policy, federal tax law, and municipal governance to discover how the state actively regulates and capitalizes on the evolving architecture of the American family. To analyze how the state actively regulates and capitalizes on this evolving architecture, we must look directly at the Internal Revenue Code and the municipal policy directives that govern public revenue collection in 2026. Within American social studies, the state is not merely a passive observer of family transitions. It is an active financial partner whose fiscal regulations heavily shape the potential outcomes of any domestic restructuring. The moment a household splits, it triggers an immediate, systemic transition in how federal, state, and local governments calculate tax liabilities, allocate public resources, and distribute municipal benefits. This administrative intersection represents a high-stakes arena where public policy directly collides with the private economic survival of millions of citizens. Consider the profound structural disruption that occurs within the federal tax apparatus during the initial fiscal year of a family division. Imagine a case study involving two professionals in Chicago, Illinois, whom we will call Marcus and Amanda. For over a decade, they utilized the most tax-advantaged filing status available to married couples in the United States: married filing jointly. This status allowed them to aggregate their incomes, maximize standard deductions, and navigate the progressive federal tax brackets with optimal efficiency. The moment their legal uncoupling is formalized, the Internal Revenue Service mandates a strict, step-by-step reconfiguration of their tax identity. They can no longer file a joint return. Instead, they must independently choose between two far less favorable statuses, single or head of household. The tactical battle over who qualifies for head of household status is one of the most contentiously debated aspects of modern public policy. To legally claim head of household status in 2026, an individual must meet precise, verifiable criteria established by federal statutory law. The taxpayer must pay more than half the cost of maintaining a primary home for the year, and a qualifying dependent child must live with that taxpayer for more than half of the year, spanning at least 183 nights. In an alternating weekly joint custody arrangement, this creates an immediate mathematical impossibility for both parents to claim the status simultaneously, as the child cannot physically spend more than half the year in two separate locations. This structural constraint forces Marcus and Amanda into a strategic negotiation that must be codified within their formal legal decree. Case studies demonstrate that if both parents independently attempt to claim the same child as a dependent to secure the head of household status and the associated child tax credit, the automated processing systems of the Internal Revenue Service will instantly flag both returns for a comprehensive audit. To avoid this administrative gridlock, a common public policy compromise involves the utilization of Internal Revenue Service Form 8332, which allows the primary residential parent to formally waive their claim to the child dependency exemption, transferring the financial credit to the non-custodial parent on an alternating annual basis. This step-by-step allocation of federal tax credits illustrates how the modern state actively uses tax policy to regulate domestic finances, forcing restructured families to navigate a complex labyrinth of bureaucratic compliance simply to protect their baseline income from excessive taxation. Beyond federal income taxation, the shared journey of family restructuring intersects heavily with municipal governance and the allocation of localized public resources, particularly in the realm of public school funding and property tax assessments. In many states, local school districts are funded primarily through municipal property taxes, and student enrollment is strictly bound by geographic residency requirements. When Amanda moves out of the primary marital home in the city center and establishes a new independent residence in an adjacent suburban municipality, she introduces a complex jurisdictional variable into the local educational ecosystem. If the joint custody agreement dictates that their children will continue attending their original urban school district, while residing 50% of the time in Amanda's new suburban home, the urban school board must process a multi-jurisdictional residency verification. Municipalities closely monitor these arrangements to prevent out-of-district students from consuming localized tax revenues without contributing to the property tax base. Amanda must produce extensive legal documentation, including the signed court parenting plan and utility ledgers, to prove her ongoing structural connection to the region. This administrative friction demonstrates that the restructuring of an American family is never a purely private affair. It constantly triggers bureaucratic oversight from local municipal authorities who are legally mandated to protect public coffers and ration community infrastructure. We must also look at how modern public policy handles the intersection of family restructuring and corporate employee benefit systems, which act as a vital parallel social safety net in the United States. In our case study, Marcus may hold a corporate position that provides comprehensive family medical, dental, and vision insurance coverage for the entire household. Under modern insurance industry regulations and federal laws like the Consolidated Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act, the formalization of a divorce constitutes a qualifying life event that legally terminates Amanda's status as a dependent on Marcus' employer-sponsored healthcare plan. This triggers an immediate, mandatory transition with significant financial consequences. Amanda faces a strict 30-day window to secure independent commercial health insurance coverage, either through her own employer or by navigating the state-administered healthcare exchanges. If she lacks independent coverage, the cost of maintaining health insurance through a private plan can suddenly consume a massive percentage of her independent monthly cash flow. Historical trends indicate that this insurance cliff frequently forces single parents to alter their career trajectories, compelling them to abandon flexible independent contracting work or small business ventures in favor of securing rigid corporate employment solely for the purpose of obtaining institutional health benefits. This shift highlights how state and corporate benefits policies collectively channel individuals into specific sectors of the labor market, using access to healthcare as a powerful lever to ensure economic conformity amidst personal transition. Furthermore, the state actively capitalizes on and monitors these transitions through the enforcement mechanisms of state-level child support enforcement agencies, which operate under federal mandates established by Title 4D of the Social Security Act. These state agencies possess immense, quasi-judicial powers designed to ensure that private citizens fund the upbringing of their children, rather than allowing them to rely on state-funded public assistance programs, like the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families Initiative. If Marcus falls behind on his calculated child support payments, the state apparatus does not wait for Amanda to file a private lawsuit. The automated tracking systems of the state enforcement agency will instantly initiate an administrative intervention. The step-by-step enforcement protocol includes the immediate, mandatory garnishment of Marcus' corporate wages directly from his employer's payroll department, the interception of his federal and state tax refunds, the suspension of his driver's license, and in severe cases of non-compliance, the placement of a statutory lien on his real estate assets or the revocation of his passport. This clinical automated exercise of state power reveals that the American legal and economic system views the financial obligations of a restructured family as a matter of critical public interest. The state maintains a vast, digital surveillance network designed to police the flow of capital between separated parents, transforming private familial duties into a highly institutionalized enforcement paradigm. As we synthesize these interconnected layers of federal tax restructuring, municipal residency auditing, corporate insurance transitions, and automated state enforcement networks, the true relationship between the citizen and the state in modern America becomes completely clear. The state does not merely process the dissolution of a family. It actively uses the transition to reassert its regulatory authority over the distribution of wealth and resources within society. Every form filed, every tax credit shifted, and every wage garnished reinforces a massive public policy apparatus designed to preserve economic order at all costs. But as we look at how the state regulates this process from the outside, we must begin to examine how these structural forces impact the deeply personal, long-term trajectory of the individuals who must build a future within this system. What happens to the concepts of career advancement, retirement security, and personal ambition when an individual is permanently bound to the rigid state-monitored infrastructure of a restructured life? In the next part of this masterclass, we will shift our focus to the long-term professional and personal horizon, exploring how the shared domestic journey redefines the very meaning of success and ambition in the modern American landscape. To explore how this shared domestic journey redefines the very meaning of success and ambition in the modern American landscape, we must examine the deep structural shifts that occur within an individual's professional trajectory following a household reconfiguration. In the sociological framework of 2026, the concept of a linear, unencumbered career path is increasingly recognized as a historical artifact that depended heavily on the unpaid, stabilizing labor of a traditional nuclear domestic structure. When that structure dissolves, the individual is forced to completely recalibrate their relationship with work, corporate advancement, and personal achievement. The modern workplace becomes an arena where the competing demands of state-monitored parenting plans, fixed child support obligations, and acute time deficits directly collide with corporate expectations of hyperproductivity and unyielding institutional loyalty. Imagine a high-stakes case study within the competitive technology sector of Seattle, Washington. Let us look at an individual named Jason, who operates as a principal product manager for a major cloud computing enterprise. Prior to his family restructuring, Jason's career trajectory was characterized by aggressive upward mobility. He routinely volunteered for high-visibility international travel assignments, logged 60-hour work weeks, and attended late-night corporate networking functions designed to secure executive sponsorship. His domestic sphere, managed primarily by his former spouse, functioned as a silent support mechanism that absorbed all logistical disruptions, allowing Jason to dedicate his full cognitive and physical energy to corporate advancement. The moment the legal decree is finalized, establishing a strict 50-50 alternating weekly custody schedule for his two young children, Jason's professional operating model undergoes an immediate, systemic transformation. Step 1 of this professional recalibration involves the absolute loss of scheduling flexibility. During his designated custody weeks, Jason faces rigid, non-negotiable temporal boundaries. He must personally manage school drop-offs at precisely 8 in the morning and pick up his children from an after-school program by 6 in the evening to avoid hefty municipal delinquency fees. The corporate tactical maneuvers that Jason previously relied on to maintain his competitive edge are suddenly neutralized. He can no longer participate in spontaneous, late-afternoon executive strategy sessions that extend past traditional business hours. He must aggressively decline last-minute transatlantic business trips because doing so would violate the court-ordered physical placement schedule, exposing him to potential legal sanctions for non-compliance with the parenting plan. Case studies in organizational sociology indicate that this sudden imposition of structural boundaries often alters how corporate leadership perceives an employee's long-term ambition. Jason may find himself subtly sidelined from high-stakes project assignments and passed over for executive promotions, as corporate algorithms and traditional managers frequently equate absolute scheduling availability with professional capability. This professional friction triggers a secondary, highly calculated shift in how Jason approaches his financial compensation and career risk profile. In the modern economic landscape of 2026, corporate professionals often achieve maximum wage growth by strategically hopping between competing firms or transitioning into high-risk, high-reward early-stage startup environments that offer significant equity components. However, for an individual bound to a strict state-mandated child support or spousal maintenance formula, taking on professional risk becomes an incredibly dangerous proposition. Consider the step-by-step financial reality of Jason's situation. His monthly support obligations are codified based on his historical, high baseline corporate salary at an established enterprise. If Jason were to leave his stable corporate position to pursue an entrepreneurial venture or join a pre-revenue startup that pays a lower base salary but offers immense potential equity, The state legal apparatus does not automatically adjust his financial obligations to match his new, lower cash flow. The family court operates on the doctrine of historical earning capacity, rather than current liquid income. If the startup fails or experiences a protracted pre-revenue phase, Jason remains legally responsible for paying the original, court-ordered support amounts. Failure to meet these obligations triggers the automated state enforcement mechanisms explored previously, including wage garnishment and asset liens. Historical trends demonstrate that this legal framework acts as a powerful, conservative anchor on the career choices of restructured professionals. Jason is effectively compelled to remain within the golden handcuffs of a rigid, predictable corporate position, suppressing his entrepreneurial ambition and sacrificing long-term wealth maximization, simply to maintain the short-term financial liquidity required to satisfy the state legal apparatus. We must also analyze the profound structural adjustments occurring on the opposite side of the professional spectrum, looking at how the shared journey redefines success for individuals who are re-entering the workforce at full capacity after a period of domestic specialization. Imagine a parallel case study involving an individual named Melissa, who resides in Charlotte, North Carolina. For the last 8 years of her marriage, Melissa focused her primary energy on managing the domestic infrastructure and raising her family, maintaining only a part-time, flexible consulting practice in corporate marketing. Upon the dissolution of the marriage, Melissa's primary objective shifts from domestic management to rapid, aggressive economic survival. She must secure a high-earning, full-time corporate position in a modern 2026 job market that has been heavily transformed by automated applicant tracking systems, artificial intelligence integration, and shifting skill requirements. Melissa faces the immediate hurdle of explaining her historical resume gap to corporate recruiters who utilize algorithmic screening tools that automatically filter out candidates with extended periods of professional inactivity. To overcome this structural barrier, Melissa must execute a highly calculated, step-by-step professional rebranding strategy. She must invest limited liquid capital into rapid micro-credentialing programs, master contemporary data analytics platforms, and aggressively leverage professional networks to bypass traditional gatekeepers. When she successfully secures a full-time position as a marketing director, her definition of professional success is fundamentally distinct from that of her unencumbered peers. For Melissa, ambition is not driven by abstract corporate status or the pursuit of luxury consumer goods. It is driven by the urgent necessity of establishing independent retirement security, rebuilding liquidated generational wealth, and securing a pristine, independent credit profile that can withstand future economic volatility. She must balance this intense professional sprint with the solo parenting duties of her custody weeks, leading to an extraordinary concentration of labor, where she effectively cams 2 full-time shifts, one corporate and one domestic, within a 24-hour cycle. This reality forces a radical optimization of her daily workflow, leading to an increased reliance on productivity tools, outsourced logistics, and strict personal boundaries that redefine what it means to be a successful executive in the modern economy. As we synthesize these divergent paths of professional anchoring and rapid labor market re-entry, we begin to perceive a profound truth within American social studies. The shared journey of family reconfiguration forces a comprehensive rewriting of the American dream itself. Success is no longer measured by the static accumulation of suburban real estate and the permanent maintenance of a unified domestic baseline. Instead, in 2026, success for millions of restructured citizens is defined by systemic adaptability, logistical resilience, and the capacity to maintain economic stability across multiple households. Ambition becomes less about scaling the corporate hierarchy at all costs and more about engineering a life that can harmonize high-level professional output with deep, non-negotiable personal obligations. This structural transformation alters the very chemistry of the American workforce, producing a massive cohort of highly disciplined, risk-averse, yet hyper-efficient professionals who view corporate structures not as a family, but as a critical utility to fund the complex architecture of their private lives. But as these individuals quietly reshape the professional landscape from within, their collective choices begin to coalesce into a massive, unstoppable cultural force that is permanently altering the broader social fabric of the United States. How do these millions of independent professional and personal transformations systematically alter the long-term cultural archetypes, media narratives, and generational dynamics of American society? In the next part of this masterclass, we will step out of the office and into the broader cultural arena, exploring how the shared domestic evolution is actively dismantling old societal stigmas and forging a completely new cultural blueprint for the 21st century American identity. To observe how this completely new cultural blueprint for the 21st century American identity is actively constructed, we must look directly at the rapid dismantlement of historical social stigmas and the emergence of new cultural narratives across mainstream American media, literature, and community institutions in 2026. Within the broad continuum of American social studies, culture acts as the primary meaning-making apparatus for the citizenry, normalizing structural transitions and converting institutional changes into shared social values. For the majority of the 20th century, the dominant cultural archetypes framed the dissolution of a nuclear household through a lens of profound personal failure, social deviance, or permanent psychological damage. Today, however, the sheer statistical scale of this shared journey has reached a critical mass, forcing a comprehensive linguistic and narrative revolution that actively redefines family reconfiguration as a valid, normative pathway of adult development. Imagine a case study of contemporary cultural consumption within an average American household. Let us look at a consumer named Kevin, a media programmer living in Austin, Texas. When Kevin looks at the landscape of modern streaming entertainment, network television, and children literature in 2026, he does not see the trope of the broken home that dominated the media of previous generations. Instead, he encounters a sophisticated, multi-layered representation of family complexity where blended households, cooperative co-parenting dynamics, and dual residential childhoods are presented as the baseline standard of the American experience. This shift in narrative production is driven by an underlying commercial reality. Media conglomerates and content creators recognize that to engage a broad modern U.S. audience, their stories must accurately reflect the complex domestic structures of the consumers watching them. Let us trace the step-by-step mechanics of this cultural rebranding, starting with the evolution of language within public discourse and interpersonal communication. In previous historical trends, the vocabulary utilized to describe a family transition was heavily loaded with deficit-based terminology. Individuals were described as coming from a broken home, a phrase that structurally implied that the core integrity of the family unit was permanently destroyed. In 2026, American social studies and general public discourse have systematically retired these deficit models, replacing them with asset-based, structural terminology. The prevailing linguistic framework now utilizes terms like restructured family, binuclear domestic unit, or co-parenting cooperative. This linguistic shift is not merely a matter of political correctness. It alters the cognitive framework through which individuals process their reality. When Kevin talks to his coworkers or interacts with his children educators, using the term restructured family changes the baseline expectation of the conversation. It moves the dialogue away from an assumption of crisis and toward an assumption of administrative management. The transition is framed not as a catastrophic end, but as a complex administrative reorganization, allowing the individuals involved to maintain their social standing, protect their dignity, and access community support systems without the burden of paralyzing social shame. We must also analyze the emergence of unique, institutionalized cultural rituals that have developed to formalize and validate this transition within the American social fabric. Throughout human history, societies have utilized structured rituals, such as weddings, graduations, and retirement parties, to help citizens process major status transitions and signal community support. Historically, the process of a domestic split lacked any such communal validation, leaving individuals to process the transition in isolating secrecy. In 2026, however, case studies reveal a rising cultural trend toward formalized uncoupling ceremonies or collaborative family reconfiguration gatherings. Imagine an intentional scenario where Kevin and his former partner host a structured dinner for their immediate extended family and close neighborhood allies. The explicit purpose of this gathering is to publicly signal their transition from a marital partnership to a collaborative co-parenting alliance. During this ritual, they explicitly state their ongoing commitment to joint parental duties, clarify the new dual household logistics for their support network, and formally release their friends and family from the pressure of taking sides in an adversarial conflict. This deliberate exercise in social engineering removes the awkwardness and social fragmentation that historically plagued common friend groups and extended families, demonstrating how modern Americans are actively inventing new civic customs to preserve community cohesion amidst institutional fluidity. Beyond localized rituals, the shared journey has given rise to a massive, parallel ecosystem of cultural influencers, digital communities, and specialized peer support platforms that function as a decentralized church of contemporary family management. On modern digital media platforms, a new generation of content creators, often self-identifying as co-parenting coaches or solo parent advocates, command massive, highly engaged audiences across the United States. These cultural entrepreneurs do not focus on the legal mechanics or the forensic calculations of asset division. Instead, they produce hyper-specific lifestyle content dedicated to the daily art of dual household execution. They publish step-by-step video tutorials on how to design matching bedrooms in separate houses so children experience visual consistency during custody handoffs, share strategies for managing holiday scheduling logistics without emotional friction, and provide public validation for the complex psychological identity shifts explored in earlier parts of this masterclass. This constant stream of digital validation creates a profound sense of shared global community for millions of isolated individuals, converting what was once an intensely private, lonely struggle into a highly visible, collective cultural movement. Furthermore, we must examine how this cultural transformation is fundamentally rewriting the generational transmission of values within American society, specifically regarding how the children of restructured households view the concepts of partnership, commitment, and personal autonomy. In American social studies, the long-term impact of any social structure is measured by its imprint on the next generation. Longitudinal case studies indicate that children raised within stable, cooperative co-parenting systems in the 21st century are developing a highly pragmatic, deeply unsentimental view of human relationships. They do not view long-term partnerships through the lens of romantic absolutism or permanent static contracts. Instead, they view relationships as dynamic partnerships that require continuous functional optimization. Having watched their parents successfully navigate a complex, multi-layered legal and logistical uncoupling, these young adults enter their own relationships with a sophisticated understanding of legal rights, financial independence, and structural adaptability. They are far more likely to utilize prenuptial agreements, maintain separate financial accounts, and prioritize independent career resilience, showing how the cultural fallout of the shared divorce journey is actively forging a highly rational, risk-managed approach to future family formation in the United States. As we synthesize these shifting media narratives, linguistic evolutions, localized rituals, digital support networks, and generational transformations, the grand architecture of the modern American cultural blueprint stands completely revealed. The shared journey of family restructuring is no longer a hidden pathway on the margins of society. It has been completely integrated into the core definition of the American experience. The contemporary culture has successfully adapted to insulate its members from historical shame, replacing outdated stigmas with a robust, highly functional ideology of resilience, flexibility, and operational efficiency. But as we stand at the apex of this cultural analysis, having traced this profound phenomenon through the complex layers of legal doctrines, economic multipliers, public policy architectures, and psychological rebrandings, we must prepare to bring our entire masterclass to its ultimate conclusion. We have mapped the entire anatomy of the system, but how do all of these disparate structural forces, the courts, the markets, the schools, the banks, and the media, coalesce to project the ultimate future of the American social structure over the next 50 years? What is the final destination for a nation that has systematically normalized the fluid family unit as its baseline reality? In the 10th and final part of this masterclass series, we will pull all of these separate threads together into a single definitive grand synthesis, delivering the ultimate macro forecast for the future of civilization, community, and human connection in the United States of America. To deliver this ultimate macro forecast for the future of civilization, community, and human connection in the United States, we must synthesize every structural layer we have uncovered throughout this masterclass series. We have traveled from the initial systemic shock of no-fault legal frameworks into the granular mechanics of equitable distribution and community property. We have analyzed the hidden corporate engines that capitalize on dual household consumption, mapped the complex labyrinth of federal tax compliance, and explored the profound psychological mutations required for successful modern co-parenting. Now, standing in the year 2026, we look out toward the next 50 years to project how these combined forces will permanently reshape the structural definition of American civic life. The grand synthesis reveals that we are not witnessing the decline of the American social contract, but rather the dawn of a highly bureaucratized, modular, and contract-driven society, where fluidity is the default operational reality. Imagine a forward-looking case study set in the mid-century landscape of 2050, anchored by a citizen named Taylor. Represents the generational culmination of the trends we are tracking today. Raised by parents who executed a flawless, app-managed parallel parenting plan in the late 2020s, Taylor's entire understanding of human institutions is built on modularity, clear metrics, and contingency planning. When Taylor enters into adulthood, the concept of a static, lifelong domestic partnership without explicit structural guardrails is viewed as an archaic and high-risk gamble. Instead, the baseline potential outcomes of modern social studies suggest that future citizens will approach all domestic unions through a hyper-rational, legalistic framework. Step 1 of this future relationship model begins long before any cohabitation occurs. The utilization of sophisticated, multi-tiered prenuptial and cohabitation agreements will become completely universal, moving past the wealthy elite and embedding deeply into the working-class socio-economic fabric. These future legal instruments will not merely dictate asset division upon a potential split. Instead, they will function as active, living operational blueprints that govern the daily flow of capital, health insurance allocations, and career specialization limits throughout the duration of the partnership. If one partner chooses to step back from the workforce to specialize in childcare, the contract will feature automatic, step-by-step equity accumulation metrics to neutralize the career gap penalties we observed in earlier case studies. This transition represents a profound shift in American civilization. The romantic baseline of the 20th century is systematically replaced by a contractual baseline, transforming interpersonal intimacy into a highly engineered joint venture. This universal contractuality will directly drive a secondary macro forecast: the absolute dominance of the modular real estate and architectural markets in the United States. The classic American suburban infrastructure, built entirely to service the fixed nuclear family model, will face a massive structural obsolescence phase. In its place, the housing markets of the mid-century will be anchored by dual-centric architectural designs specifically engineered to facilitate seamless family restructuring. Imagine municipal zoning laws shifting to prioritize residential units that can effortlessly convert from a single, unified estate into two independent, self-contained living spaces with separate entrances, utilities, and kitchens. Case studies in urban planning suggest that this modular infrastructure will allow restructuring families to maintain geographic proximity for the sake of child custody stability, eliminating the district residency friction and transportation bottlenecks that plague modern municipal school systems today. Parents will be able to execute a 50-50 custody rotation without forcing children to commute across vast metropolitan boundaries, altering the velocity of the local real estate market, and creating a highly stable, resilient form of micro-community architecture that insulates the localized economy from the shock of domestic uncoupling. Furthermore, this modular social structure will force a complete revolution in the American corporate benefits and labor market apparatus. As the single lifelong breadwinner model completely vanishes from historical trends, corporations will be compelled to adapt their human resource algorithms to accommodate a workforce that operates alternating weekly availability cycles. Future case studies project the rise of corporate co-parenting job-sharing models, where enterprises explicitly design high-level management positions to be held by professional pairs who synchronize their corporate outputs with their non-custodial weeks. The state-federal tax apparatus will similarly undergo a grand synthesis, completely abandoning the binary choice between single and head of household statuses. Policy analysts project the implementation of a unified, proportional domestic tax tracking system where deductions, child tax credits, and dependent exemptions are algorithmically distributed to individual bank accounts on a pro rata basis, directly tied to the verifiable number of nights a child spends within a specific geolocated residential node. This will eliminate the adversarial gridlock and annual Internal Revenue Service audit triggers that characterize the contemporary tax landscape, turning the relationship between the citizen, the family, and the state into an automated stream of real-time resource allocation. As these legal, structural, and corporate frameworks achieve absolute optimization, the ultimate transformation will manifest within the psychological and cultural fabric of human connection itself. The historical trends of isolation and social stigma that define the shared journey in the 20th century will be completely inverted. In this future landscape, the capacity to successfully manage a complex web of restructured relationships, blended sibling cohorts, and multi-layered co-parenting alliances will be viewed as the ultimate marker of civic competence and high emotional intelligence. The idealized archetype of the static, unchanging family will be replaced by the archetype of the fluid, resilient network. Young Americans will be systematically educated from primary school onward in the art of structural negotiation, conflict resolution, and institutional management, producing a population of highly adaptive, independent citizens who view personal transition not as a structural failure, but as a standard, predictable phase of the human life cycle. The shared divorce journey, therefore, ceases to be viewed as a disruptive anomaly within American social studies. It is recognized as the very forge that hammered out the architecture of a highly sophisticated, hyper-resilient, 21st century civilization. We have now completed our comprehensive 10-part deep dive masterclass into the anatomy of this major societal pillar. We have dismantled the cultural myths, audited the economic multipliers, and mapped out the exact institutional coordinates of how the American family adapts, survives, and redefines itself across the contemporary terrain. You now possess a highly sophisticated, data-driven framework to interpret the shifting currents of modern history, civic policy, and human economics through a completely clear, objective lens. But as we conclude this definitive examination of the domestic landscape, an even larger, more complex structural horizon begins to materialize on the edge of our analytical radar. The evolution of the family is only one component of a massive, parallel transformation occurring within the broader architecture of global demographic shifts, intergenerational wealth transfers, and the changing nature of national identity itself. How do these domestic reconfigurations intersect with the unprecedented macro trends of declining global fertility rates, the massive multi-trillion-dollar wealth transfer from the baby boomer generation, and the sudden rise of decentralized digital corporate networks that allow individuals to bypass state jurisdictions entirely? In our upcoming masterclass series, we are going to step out of the domestic sphere and launch into a high-stakes, comprehensive analysis of the global demographic winter, exploring the hidden economic forces that will dictate the survival of nations, markets, and communities over the next century.